first of all, thanks very much for inviting me. It's actually really nice to come along and do one of these in person, because I think for the longest time I've been doing them online, which you just don't get the connection. It's not as good. So thank you for hosting and having me here. So I've been asked to talk to you guys about entrepreneurship in corrosion, which is an enormously vast topic. So what I've tried to do is sit down and think about, okay, what are the most valuable things that I can share with you. So the objectives of what I've got to talk about today is to first of all provide you with my story. So every entrepreneur has a story, and everyone looks for the magic sauce in every story. And sorry, there isn't any, as we'll discuss later. But you can have my story, and then hopefully, if you've got questions, you can ask. I'd like to really focus our time together on the discussion of the importance of identifying and defining your personal values. So we're going to spend some time on that. And then I want to discuss how important those values are when you're building an organization or building a team in an organization, and how that relates to culture. So I think those are the sort of three main things that we're going to kind of go through today. We've got a couple of activities planned. They're actually quite deeply personal. The first one is anyway, and so it's not something that I'm expecting people to finish as we're together. I'm hoping that you'll take it away and actually work on it yourself. And then we've got another activity at the end, which is more of a discussion. So we'll do that. So the top three takeaways, I thought I would start with this in case I kind of waffle off in a different direction. But the first point is that you're all students. You're all working towards your technical degrees, and I'm here to tell you that that's not enough. Your technical knowledge, while very important, is not going to be enough. Regardless of whether you decide to start your own company, you join an organization, wherever you end up. Leadership starts with values, and obviously you need leadership skills in order to start an organization or even to create a team, lead a team within an organization. And that values create culture. So culture is one of those things that can be a little bit ambiguous. People aren't entirely sure what it means. We're going to talk about that because it is very vital that you end up somewhere where the culture fits your values, or you create somewhere where your values are met. So I thought I would start at the beginning, tell you a little bit about myself, tell you a little bit about my company, just to give you some backdrop on kind of what my company does and why I chose corrosion. So I'm thinking back, it's actually quite a long way to think back now. It's like over 2 decades ago. I actually went to university when I was 17. And at that point, I wasn't entirely sure how I was going to marry my sort of love of science and engineering and all of these things with this deep need to sort of save the world. I was a member of Greenpeace. I used to go on lots of things that I wasn't supposed to be in school, and I didn't go, and I was sort of demonstrating. And I was actually sitting in a lecture in my first year that was given by a chap from Lloyd's Register. And he was telling us about this failure of a tanker that had occurred, and the tanker had spilled all this oil everywhere, put lives in danger, and the environmental impact was huge. And so I sort of had a light bulb moment, and I sort of put the two things together because this was a corrosion failure. And so I sort of was able to say, okay, well, I'm actually able to take something that I can do, I have competency in, and I'm building competency in, and actually marry it to making a difference in the world. So I was very sort of idealistic as a 17-year-old, but really that was where my why came from. And I think before that, I'd been quite overwhelmed at all the problems in the world. How am I going to change things? How am I going to make an impact? And so it was actually, this moment gave me my why. So that's why I ended up in corrosion. My career timeline, pretty linear, as you can see, up until the point that ICE was born, or ICE Dragon, my company. So I started off with a materials engineering degree from Zoe College. I then, age 20, went on to do a master's at Manchester University. And then I actually worked for 3 years in engineering consulting as a corrosion engineer in the UK, focusing mostly on highway infrastructure, which, funnily enough, we're just coming back I then started my PhD at U of T. So I decided I had this idea in my head from when I was 9 years old. I need to do this PhD because it's the hardest thing I can think of to do. So I came back to do that at U of T, and obviously moved to Canada in the process as well. And I've been here almost 20 years. I then went on to pitch an idea to a large engineering consultancy company because they didn't have any corrosion engineers in their teams. So I started I sort of became an entrepreneur. I started my own team at Hatch. Had a parting of ways, which we can talk about a little bit later. And then in 2016, I started my own company, ICE Dragon Corrosion. Along the way, I was actually really, really fortunate to have a lot of really good mentors. And I cannot stress the importance enough of having good mentors. I know they're all white men, but they were good white men. We have Sir Robin Grimes, who was my undergraduate thesis supervisor, who actually ended up becoming, I think, some nuclear authority in the UK. He's awesome. We're still in touch. There's Paul Lambert, Chris Atkins, who were my mentors at McDonald's. And then at the bottom, there's Doug Reeve on the far right, and David Coakley, who's the former CEO of DuPont. So the reason I want to mention these two gentlemen at the bottom is because they were the ones that came up with this idea of teaching leadership to engineers just as I was starting my PhD. And without them, I wouldn't be standing here talking to you about my company. And so what I've tried to do is take some of that coursework and the learning that I had that was so vital to me at that point and try and condense it into the small time that we have together. So why did I decide ultimately to set up on my own? I've been in a couple of large organizations, large consulting organizations, where everyone sort of agreed and they nodded and they said, yeah, corrosion is important, yeah, we need that, yeah, we need somebody who's a specialist in that. But they saw it more as a nice to have. They didn't see it as something that was absolutely vital to the way we were designing things and thinking about how assets perform long term. I also felt that being a specialist, I was pigeonholed a lot of the time, and I didn't get the opportunity to expand my capabilities, to make decisions, to think strategically about things. And I'll go into the sort of story behind it at the end of today as well, but I also experienced quite a large culture mismatch. So there's that word again, culture. And I really didn't feel like I was existing in a culture that fit me. This is where values and that just comes in. So we'll talk about that a little bit. So what does my company do? Well, I've been fortunate enough to work across many different industries. So I mentioned sort of highway infrastructure. I've also worked in nuclear, oil and gas. A lot of our work now is focused in the mining sector just because that's one of the larger sectors in Canada. But we see corrosion literally everywhere. We see it everywhere. It sort of infects many things. So we've got some examples here of the different types of corrosion challenges that you might see. We've got erosion corrosion. That weld was attacked by microbes. We've got very severe exposure from atmosphere because the environment was very acidic. We've got stress corrosion cracking, pitting, damage to concrete. We've got acid attack of concrete down in that corner there, just above the 10. Galvanic corrosion, corrosion under insulation, issues within piping because of the formation of scale and tubercles, and then obviously with marine environments, you have a lot of issues there too. So there are many corrosion challenges across different industries. So going back to my initial story of how do you change the world then, Zoe, beyond the sort of obvious physical impact to our assets, to our physical assets, if we have failures of those assets because of corrosion, it actually directly impacts a lot of other things. And I know that Yolanda talked about this as well, about the link between corrosion and sustainability. We have significant safety hazards, even fatalities because of corrosion. So the top picture that I've got there is actually of a ship loader at an iron ore facility in Chile, where the whole thing collapsed one morning because of corrosion of the cables that And I was 50 kilometers further north on the same coast in Chile, about to do an inspection on a ship loader. So this one really brought it home to me, the importance of understanding corrosion and making sure that we take care of it, take care of people. Of course, there are also financial impacts associated with corrosion as well. We have one client that's sort of seeing unscheduled downtime of their production facility, which is costing them up to 20 million a year, just in small failures, things that are happening that are shutting parts of production down. Increased maintenance costs, depending on the severity of the corrosion. I haven't put our Navy client into those numbers, but you don't want to know what that number is. It's very high. We also have reduced asset service life, loss of asset availability, environmental discharge events. So the bottom picture there is a pipeline that burst in, I think it was Brazil. It's a slurry pipeline, so it's taking mining tailings or something like that away from the mine site. Burst, and obviously you get this enormous environmental impact. And pitting corrosion is one of the leading causes of pipe corrosion. I'm looking at Shannon, but she's not listening to me. I'm talking about pipelines now. I thought I would throw you in there. And beyond that, of course, there's an impact on community relations, which of course, in the mining sector is becoming certainly much more important than it was. The impact that mines have on indigenous communities, local communities, and that sort of thing. If you have assets failing, safety incidents on site, environmental incidents, your relationship with your community and your social license to operate becomes an important problem. And actually the last one I've thrown on there as well, because it's not something you might think about, but it actually lowers morale of the people working on site to see everything corroded. And you think, oh, that's pretty minor. But if you sort of walk into a site and you see, oh, everything's corroded and you don't have pride in what you're doing, the whole culture disintegrates. So it's part of that as well. So ICE Dragon was born 2016. My sort of initial thought about sort of setting the company up was there's a need for the corrosion technical engineering piece for sure, but we also have to make sure that we're tying that into the business objectives for our clients, and that's just what I've just been talking about how it ties into sustainability and operations. So our vision is really just to completely change the way that our clients think about corrosion, whether it's a client that's at the early stage of a design, so that's our best place to get in, where we can actually make changes up front, or they have an operating facility. We're trying to think about decommissioning at the moment as well, because there's lots of needs in that area as well, but we're not quite there yet. But really it's just to get people to start thinking about corrosion and just do it better. So of course, we do the specialized engineering piece. So we marry all of the things that you think about when you think about corrosion engineering, but we're now tying it into these corrosion risk management programs, where we're actually thinking strategically, how does this tie into your business? How are we planning our work? How are we prioritizing it? How are we pulling this into your risk assessments for your company? We also think about behavioral changes. So we're starting to get into how do we change the culture of the organization to adopt the best practices in corrosion. So we're kind of marrying those two things together in order to give our clients a sort of better way of managing things, a sort of more holistic way of managing things. Fortunately, when I started the company in 2016, Nate, which is now obviously, came out with this impact study. So if you haven't read it, it is worth a read. I know it's very long, but it is worth a read. You'll kind of understand a little bit more of the context of what I'm talking about. But they surveyed, I think it was 243 different organizations to pull out from them what were the actual best practices around corrosion management. What were the things that we needed to think about in order to set programs up that were going to work. So I'm not going to say much more on that, but it was just fortunate at the time that this came out when I was starting to think about it. This is the team as it stands. This is our team, our ICE Dragon team. So everyone here is a corrosion engineer or related. Even Dina, this is Dina here. Even Dina is a materials engineer, but she's joined us as a business process analyst. So we're sort of very heavy in sort of materials and corrosion. And of course, we've got Nicole and Shay, who are So this is the company. The company is the people. So these are our clients. So these are the kinds of people that we're working with. Our sort of big ones are, again, in mining, and we've been also working with the Navy for the last 2 years as well. And we've just started working with NRC on steel bridges too. So lots of fun things. So that's ICE Dragon. So you have a bit of context for what we do. So let's dig into the story. So it took me a little while when I was putting these slides together to think about, okay, this idea of magic sauce. Because every sort of time I've gone to listen to an entrepreneur talking about their company, everyone is sitting there like, what's the secret? What's the secret? Tell us the secret. And I'm sort of here to say that there really isn't a secret. The equation along the top is basically how I did it. So skills, you are all working on that right now in school. This is your technical skills, gaining that technical competency. The other piece to the equation is the leadership training that I received when I was a student at U of T. So like I said, Dave and Doug set up this leadership course. It started off as a course, and I was lucky enough to be the first cohort that went through it. I've since TA'd that course, and I have developed a curriculum for that course, and I've actually taught the course myself for 2 years. I cannot overestimate how important that course was to me. Life generally, and having those leadership skills in order to set this company up, I wouldn't have known what I was doing without it. So then the last piece is general life chaos. So I'm going to tell you about that as well. But what I'm trying to pull out for you today is one of the sort of core learnings that I got from that course that allowed me to set the company up, and that's really stood me in good stead for life generally. So even if you don't go on to be entrepreneurs, you may go and lead inside an organization, you might have your own team. Even if you're leading yourself in your life or leading your family, the skills that I got from this course have really permeated through everything that I do. So the general life chaos, I feel like it would be, I would be doing you a disservice if I didn't share with you the story of what was happening as I started ICE up, because I think sometimes we have this illusion in our head that entrepreneurs, they start the business up and they work really hard and they get capital and they do all of these things, and there's a pathway. And I don't really think that there is a pathway. So I think, as I mentioned before, in terms of my career, I stopped working at Hatch. I didn't stop working at Hatch. I was let go from Hatch. I self-sabotaged my position by asking too many questions around diversity in the company. Basically, that's what happened. And so then I ended up just before Christmas in 2015, sitting in my car in the car park of the office, and I just started to laugh. I was going through a divorce. I was a newly single parent. I had no capital. I was all tied up in various things, and I just lost my job. And of course, I'm here on my own with no family, right? I'm an immigrant, and I just sat in that car and I laughed because the universe was really kicking my ass and saying, "Look, you've had this idea in your head for such a long time, and you haven't done it. And unless I kick you, you're not going to do it." And so then and there, I made the decision, all right, I'm going to give this a try. So I think the learning for me is sometimes that we look at chaos in life or things happening in life that are on the surface quite negative or messy. And we sort of look at that as being not a good thing. But actually, you can always find the deepest learning at those points in your life. So I made the decision in the car that day to start the company, and 4 hours later, I had my first project. And that's just the way of, I think, again, the universe saying, yeah, you're on the right path. Go do it. So I don't think that piece there is teachable. I think it's wherever you end up, you have to sort of look around you and take the learnings and the position that you're in. But the thing I can help you with is the leadership training. And that's actually a picture of me in 2016 that I sent one of my friends going, I don't know what I'm doing. the leadership training is the piece I can help you with. I can pass on. So why develop your leadership skills? So let's take it back a little bit. So this is my definition of what leadership is. You may have your own, but I thought I would share this with you just to give us a sort of common ground. Leadership is a process that begins with self. It's about defining your own values. It's a process where we inspire, empower other people to create positive change. I don't know if anyone has thoughts on that definition or disagree with it. Leadership is different from management. We often sort of mix the two things up, but they're actually two different skill sets. Management is around, for example, coping with complexity. So you're looking to plan, to work within constraints, timelines, for example, budget, resources. It's about organization, staffing, problem solving, compliance, all extremely vital pieces to an organization. Your organization will not go without a management skill set. But there's also the leadership piece. So the leadership piece is about creating change. It's about envisioning change and then making it happen. So setting direction, coming up with a vision, coming up with a strategy. A lot of what I find myself doing now is aligning people to the direction, to the vision, to the culture that I'm trying to create. It's about communication, and it's about that finding that spark in everyone and motivating and inspiring people. So I think it's very important to make sure that we make the distinction between the two, both needed, both absolutely vital for creating a company. My beliefs around leadership, it's not something that we're born with. I think that idea is old-fashioned. You are not born a leader. You might be born with certain traits that make it easier for you, but it is something that we can learn. It's a process. It's not a position. So it doesn't matter where you are in the organization, you are a leader. You have the ability to lead. It also begins with self. It begins with a deep understanding and knowledge and continual self-reflection on yourself, what's important to you and where your values are. And everyone within an organization is responsible for leadership. Why do engineers need leadership? Well, because engineering projects always involve people. They always involve people, whether it's your teammates, your bosses, your people, your vendors, contractors, other designers, clients. It always involves people. So leadership, in my opinion, empowers us as engineers. It makes us better engineers. And I would also go as far as to say if we only go into our careers with just technical knowledge, we've actually got half of what we need in order to succeed. And I would also argue that the skills that you learn in learning leadership actually sort of cascade into all these other aspects of your life as well. So leadership is the work, and it is work, believe me, it's very, very hard work that you have to do in order to motivate and inspire people to make changes. So we've talked a lot about values, so let's dig into that now. What are values? When I say the word values, I'm simply meaning what's important to you in your life. What are the beliefs that you hold? What are your principles or standards, right? So when we talk about values, and I know I've got Nicole and Shay on the line as well, who've been through this exercise with me already, but your values are not fixed. You don't hold on to the same set of values as you go through life because life changes. So they can change organically, or you actually have the choice to decide to change them, right? Which I think is actually, again, really empowering to think about because you're in control of the design of your life. So it's important to know what they are. It's important to know what that means to you, because if I said family, that might mean something different to you. It might mean something different to you, right? So important to define what that means to you and understand that these are going to change and that you can actually change them. Knowing your values is the foundation of leadership. If you do not know your values, you will not be a good leader. So this is where we, as leaders, we formulate our direction. What am I going to do in my career? Why is that important? What do I want my life to look like? All focus back in on values. When we have conflict, we come back to values, right? They're almost a bit like a compass, setting the direction for where we want to be. And they also help to create the framework for an organization, right? So I'm going to share my values with you. And sorry, Eve, I put you in this picture on a horse. But I mentioned family. So when I did this this exercise that we're going to do together, way back as a student, a PhD student, I was actually pregnant with my first daughter, not her sister, Isabel. And my definition of family was not the same as it is right now. And I didn't have family in my top five. It just didn't, it meant something different to me. It's a good example of how things can change. So my values are family. I value connection with the people that I love. Integrity is really important to me, making sure that I live with authenticity, doing the right thing. I have a lot of compassion. I want people to know that they can count on me, that I will help them. I'm working a little bit more on self-compassion, but that's another story. Health, I think as I've got older, this has become more important again. Making sure I take care of myself physically so that I can show up and be a good leader. Courage. I think you can't be an entrepreneur without a bit of that. And probably a slight touch of madness as well. Tenacity. Just having the ability not to give up, but also knowing when to give up. So those are my values there. And so often what you'll find is that the values of the founder, or what you should find, or the values of the founder are reflected in the values of the company. So our company values at ICE Dragon, integrity, well-being, and growth. I won't go through the details, but she can share the slides. You can have to think about it later. But those things come from my values, and so they are the sort of values that we hold as an organization. And so with everybody coming in, and Shay and Nicole, our interns for this year, did this exercise with me. So we sat down, we looked at their personal values, they went away, how to reflect. I sat down and talked to them. How do your personal values reflect what we're doing in the company, and how do we use that to help you to work on things that are meaningful to you and plan your well, they only have like a very little careers at the moment, but 4 months of work, right? So that's how we kind of marry those two things together. So that brings us to the first exercise. So for those online, I am going to put the slides up, and I guess Shay and Nicole get a cup of tea because I know you've already done this. But I want to spend, because understanding your values is such an important part of leadership, entrepreneurship, anything you do in life. I thought that we would actually take some time right now to sit down and do this values exercise. So this values exercise comes directly from Dave Copeland, who created the first course in leadership at UT, who was the former CEO of DuPont, who has written a book on leadership, who knows lots and lots about leadership. But then I took it over. So we're going to do the exercise. So as you're going through, I think there are just some pointers, some questions that I want you to think about. How do I define the values or the words that I've chosen to reflect my own personal values? Because as I said, the example I gave is family might mean something different to me than to you, for example. What's the definition of that to me? Ask yourself, would the people around me recognize these values in me? Do I actually behave in a way that reflects what I think is important? Are these my values, or have I adopted them from other people? And I think that in a lot of times this comes up when I do this exercise with students, because you're kind of in that transitionary period in your life between moving from being at home with parents to opening your life up as And then the last question I find is the really exciting question to me is, are these values serving me? Do I need to change them? Do I want to change them? Okay? And like I said, this is a pretty deep and meaningful exercise. It's not intended that we finish this today. I'm hoping that you'll take it away and use it as a tool. It's something that I come back to every Christmas, actually. Around that time when I started ICE Dragon, I come back to this exercise and I reevaluate it. And actually Eve, who's not paying attention, Eve has actually sat down with me and also done this exercise. Sort of, it's one of those, it's a really good reflection tool, so hopefully some of you find it very useful. So I'm going to throw it up here, but I've also got it printed out for those of you in the classroom as well. So it's meant to be a sort of quiet, do-it-yourself type of exercise. So we are going to sit in hopefully comfortable silence for the next 15 minutes while you guys have a think about it. But then maybe if people are stuck, you can talk to your neighbors. It's always a good idea to kind of think about it. So I think the rest of us can have a cup of tea, or would you mind giving me a timer? Can those online see? This is okay, it's very small.
I think it's fine.
And don't worry if you're kind of a bit stumped, because the first time I picked this up, it took me hours and hours to come up with the answers. Want a sheet? It's not a race, by the way. If you've only got one thing in there, that's fine, or even none. All right, folks, I'm going to bring you back. All right, so how did everyone find that? Is that something that you've been asked to do before? Yeah? Some of you are nodding, some of you not. Did you find when you did it this time that your answers were different from the last time you did it? Or was it quite different?
Yeah, I think last time I really had to sit and think about it, and I don't think I had answers right away. But this time, since I'd already contemplated it,
We had clarity on it. That's great. And who said that they hadn't done something like this before? How did you find it? Yeah, so the first time that I did this exercise, I had a very similar reaction. Firstly, as an engineer, no one had ever asked me to sit down and think about value, because it's not something that you're typically asked to do. You're asked to sit down and solve this problem or learn this information. I found it very difficult as well. Is there anybody here that wants to share any thoughts that they had, any surprises that came out of that short exercise? Want to choose a value to share with us? Go ahead. Faith? Right. You need some faith, I think, if you're going to get through that. So it's faith in the context of faith in yourself.
Yes.
Yeah. So somebody else might interpret faith as being faith in God or faith. You know what I mean? So again, that definition is really important, right? Faith in yourself. Good insight. So stick with that, and then the idea is that you sort of use this as a starting point, and I'm sure you've maybe gone through this already. You've done a similar exercise, right? You use this as a starting point, and then you can dig into it, right? And it's about taking that and doing the self-reflection. How is this reflected in my life? Is this something I'm choosing? How does this piece of me, how is it reflected in everything that's around me? Did anyone come up with a word that you weren't quite expecting to be on that list? Or do you think that they're quite, there were no big surprises? Go ahead, yeah. So that's actually done deliberately. So a lot of the words on this list can kind of mean the same thing, and the idea is to sort of force you to decide which word actually, for me, is that word. So I'm glad that you brought that up. It's a good observation. Yeah, because again, it comes back to what's the definition of that word to me, and it forces you to say, well, is it this word or is it this word? Like, which one is it?
The ones that I chose were just from these few.
That's the top. Yeah.
And I believe that most of the things that I actually have in my mind, and I have some stuff from her that I mentioned here.
Yeah.
So, like,
that's good.
I can mention them in very few words.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. And so next time someone asks you in an interview, which I don't think they often do, I do all the time.
Yeah.
But next time someone asks you, you'll be able to say, these are my values. This is what I'm looking for. Right? Because you've had that chance to sit down and say, this is how I'm defining it, this is what it means to me, and this is what it looks like. Right? Yeah. Did you have something else to add?
No, it's like just writing about them, that most of them are like, for example, like mentioned achievement.
Right.
In my personal life. I mean, I mentioned it after my graduation from my bachelor. I was like, okay, not dream, just heard about something, and I felt that I really liked, working in that company, going to somewhere. Let's think about the working situation, studying, work for all of us. And I know that it is very difficult to believe that, okay, I dream about that, and I want to make it happen, but it happened.
But that's what leadership is.
Yeah.
It's about having a dream, or in other professional terms, we call it a vision, right? And it's about how do I get myself from where I am now to achieving, right? That's what it is, right?
The first step for me was like just dreaming about that. I really like to do that. I really like to work in a company just like that. And the next step was like reading about that, finding some people, not very professionally from
Yeah.
talking to my friends. Okay, I know someone working there. I know someone studying there, and just gathering some data from there. The next step is like going to LinkedIn, some other places, making some connections very randomly. Don't know anyone there. And
But it's
after
your
that,
strategy. That's your kind of strategy
Yeah.
of how you're going to fulfill that vision,
Exactly.
right? And I think the point of this exercise is to give you a foundation in order to be able to do that. If you know what's important to you, you have it well defined, you know what you're looking for. We're going to get into that now. Is there anyone else who'd like to share anything from this exercise? Did you guys find it useful, or kind of not quite sure yet, or at the front you look quizzical?
Oh
How
no,
did you
no,
find
no.
it?
It was good.
Yeah?
Like I felt like there were a lot of connecting words, I
Yes.
guess.
Similarly. Yeah.
Like for example, let's say I picked continuous improvement, right?
Yeah.
And then the next word I would automatically choose is probably hard work because you need
Yeah.
to supplement that.
Yeah.
So that's what
There's a
I
lot of
felt. Yeah.
linkages.
Yeah.
Go ahead. The most challenging part of this exercise I found was not just thinking of the values, but was thinking of the actions to carry out the values. Because it's easy for me to be like, okay, I value like diversity and like multiple perspectives, but then deciding like how to do that, I think you have to go through like a little trial and error. Like I can think about this
for
now,
sure.
but now I'm like, how does that reflect in my life? So
Yeah.
it's definitely like it definitely got me thinking, and
Yeah.
I think it's important to consider your values because personally, I am just in a big question mark stage of my life, as I'm sure a lot of people are.
And you'll be there again many times.
for probably the next like 10 to 15 years at least.
Yeah.
So I think this is really helpful for like now I'm gonna go out and try to decide like what are the actions, like how can I live my values. So I think it was very helpful.
Yeah. And just keep an eye on them because they change and you can change them. Okay. Excellent. So we're here. So the next piece that I want to talk about then, and coming back to the sort of what I'm supposed to be talking about, which is entrepreneurship, how do these values help us to create company culture? So I've mentioned this word a few times, so I thought it might be good just to, again, sort of define it. Culture is kind of how we do things around here, right? It's typically a reflection of the values of the people that are in the organization, or at least it should be. It forms part of the identity of an organization. And really, for me, it's about how do we behave in this organization. So if you want to think about a very sort of simple sort of definition for culture, it's how do people behave in that organization? Because there's no point, as you quite rightly say, having a value and then actually not acting it, because there's a complete association, right? So if I were to say to you, my value is health, but I never work out, I just value health. There's no authenticity behind that, right? I value health, I have a trainer, I work out 4 times a week. That matches, right? So when we are talking about culture, you don't, and I'm not expecting you to read this slide, it was just, this is what happened when I typed in how important is culture in an organization into Google. So you don't have to fall very far down that rabbit hole to understand how important the definition and building of a culture is in an organization. This can be your own company, like I've done, or it can be within your own team at work. It can be within larger organizations that already exist. But without having a strong culture, you're not going to have happy people, and a company is people. So that's why I wanted to pull it up today. Why do we need strong cultures? I think sort of inherently we kind of know why it's important, but I think if you can just sort of equate having a strong, healthy culture to strong, healthy people who are the company, that equation isn't really very difficult. But actually, so we're going to get into an exercise in a minute. I think we already know what toxic cultures look like. In fact, some of you may have already been in some of those toxic cultures, right? But it really is, for me, it's how do we define an organization environment so that we bring out the best in people, that we take care of their well-being in the organization, professionally, mentally, energetically. allies. And if you've got a strong culture, you know what that feels like. You've got a collective loyalty. You can even measure that with things like retention rates of staff, right? People feel safe physically, psychologically at work. They feel like they belong, which is a good word. They're energized to perform the work. They're excited to show up. They're not coming to work on a Monday going, oh my God, I want to just go back to bed. Right? I mean, sometimes you're going to be like that, but predominantly you should feel happy about going to work. And you'll find that people want to have influence beyond their job description. They're not just showing up to do what's written down on their job description. And you'll find that you're healthy. And that's actually something we can also measure in a culture. How many sick days do we have? How many mental health days are people taking, and that sort of thing. So strong cultures are very important in an organization, and guess what? It is the job of the leader, so that's anyone in the organization, it's the job of the leader to create that culture and reinforce that culture in line with the shared values. So I put a lot of emphasis in my job as I've kind of transitioned from engineer more into CEO in the last year because we're growing, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about this particular piece and doing a lot of work around it. I really like the idea of the word belonging. I think that it incorporates a lot of the discussions that we have around diversity and inclusion and psychological safety. That's a good word that I use. It's not something that we force. It's something we discuss. It's something that we reinforce. It's about role model leadership. So again, I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name there. Casey, as Casey was saying, it's no good to say as an organization we value diversity, and then you look at the board of directors and they're all white men from one or two Canadian universities. And I'm not just sort of pulling that out of thin air. So I think, there has to be role modeling of that by everyone in the organization. Strong cultures, people know what the culture is. They know what is valued. They can tell you the definition of why something is important in the organization. And I've got at the bottom there, this is something that I've been recently thinking about. Strong culture organizations encourage heroes, so people that also embody those types of behaviors that we want to encourage. So we've actually just sort of set up a sort of shout out, or actually Nicole did it. I don't know why I'm taking credit for it, but Nicole has set up a way that we can sort of have shout outs for our peers. When we see somebody behaving in a way that's really aligned to what we're about, we can actually pull that out and say, hey, I saw you doing this, well done. So there are ways to reinforce it. Fortunately, there are some tools as leaders that we have. Obviously, the first one is define the values of the company, but it just does require a lot of thinking. And I was complaining to Yolanda earlier that setting aside that time for deep thinking and strategic thinking about things like this is, again, a really important job, a really important use of your time if you're setting up an organization. Leaders have to walk the talk, right? And I think you've done that. We have to live the values. Our behavior has to reflect those values. We have to spend a lot of time listening to people. So communication, not just about talking, it's also about listening, actively listening to what people are saying to you, which is why we do this values exercise with everybody that comes into the organization, right? We have to understand people's goals, their vision, like how they see themselves fitting in and how they see their lives progressing. There's a lot of allyship, mentorship, coaching that goes on around it as well. And we have a little framework that we use, and this is also from Dave Coakley's piece as well. He talks about traditions, totems, and taboos. So traditions are rituals, actions that bind people, so things like our shout-out. We have awards around culture. We have social events that cement us, right? So that would be traditions. Totems could be symbols. So here at UBC, we've got the UBC shield thing. The logo, we have a logo as well. And then we have taboos, so things, it's important to also define what we will absolutely not tolerate in this company, and that's through We can also reward desired behavior and punish behavior that is not, in line. So, as I said, I've been thinking about this a lot, and I know you can't read this, but again, I'll share the slides if you want to dive into it. But I've actually put this into recently a strategic cultural sustainment plan, because we've naturally sort of ended up with this really good culture, and until recently it wasn't really sort of a formal thing. It just kind of organically evolved out of the people that were in the organization. But it's got to the point where we're growing. And when you start growing, you have to make sure that you're holding on to the good things in your culture. And so you have to start being a lot more thoughtful and about the actions that you're taking. So we have a plan. And in it, we've got examples of behavior and how that links into the values. So again, values and core. So I know I've kind of alluded to this at the beginning when I was talking to you about my career. I've been in a number of situations in my career where I've been in cultures that were not a good fit for my values. And at the time, I could actually feel it physically. It was anxiety. There was a knot in my stomach. I didn't want to go into work. I didn't feel like I was being listened to. I felt frustrated. So you can normally tell, even on a physical level, when you're not in an organization or a culture that fits you for whatever reason. But it's important to pay attention to that. So I've been, as I said, I started my career off in a large organization. Is that somebody's phone? Is that my phone? Outside. Something outside. Okay. So, I just want to, we all kind of have, we all inherently know what a toxic kind of culture looks like, right? So for me, I felt excluded. I felt like I was in an old boys club much of the time. There was talk about diversity and inclusion, but no one was really doing anything meaningful about it. So I had this sense of lack of belonging. I'm sure I'm hearing something, but maybe it's, would you go check on this? I didn't feel that because I kind of didn't look a certain way or didn't act a certain way, there were fewer opportunities for me. I didn't have good mentors. Like a lot of the mentors that I put up there on the board were actually from university, or I lucked out with one place where I had great mentors, but then above them it was all awful. I felt undervalued. I'm someone who's always had a lot of really great ideas and the ability to drive them forward, and I felt like that was squashed, right? And then the big kicker for me was the flexibility. So things when I had children changed completely. My values changed completely, right? And I was in an environment where if you couldn't travel, if you couldn't relocate for long periods of time, your opportunities were very minimal. There was no flexibility and no ability to bring in this value of mine into what I was doing professionally. I had very poor work balance, like for life work balance. So my value of health went down the drain, right? I was very stressed. I didn't have time for, I was traveling a lot. I didn't have time to look after myself. And so what this I ended up feeling resentful. There was no trust, right? And I don't know, maybe you're early on in your career, you haven't really experienced something like that. But really what this bad cultures, or cultures that are not well thought out, or if you're in a culture that actually just doesn't fit you, it leads to a loss of potential, a loss of well-being. So it's really, really important to get this right if you're starting your own company or if you're entering any organization. It's really important to make sure that you get this right. So what I'd like to do now is maybe get everyone to kind of pair up. And online, you can maybe just do this here just individually. But I'd like you to have a sort of self-reflection for 5-10 minutes. Have you ever experienced a culture that either just didn't fit you? There was nothing wrong with the culture, it just didn't fit you. Or you found it inherently toxic. What did that look like? How did that feel to you? Why was there a mismatch? Was it because of your values, go back to your values exercise, where your values not being met. And then start to ask yourself, okay, if I were to do that again today, what would I do differently? What questions would I ask in order to make better decisions about where I put myself?
Put the online people in a break. And how long? 10 minutes?
I think 10 minutes. Yeah. Do you want to move over here and work together?
I have a lot to say about this.
You go first, I'm like,
I was so inspired. Well, it's just my biggest problem. Public communication, I think I struggle to like know things. I just don't know things. If you don't communicate it to me, they're like people imply things, and I'm like, I don't really get it. And I feel like in my current lab right now, they have a very like, well, if you don't know, like, figure it out, and if you can't figure it out, we're not gonna help you figure it out. Like, I wish just like information.
I hate that.
There's like no like mentorship. There's no like.
They're doing it as a four.
Oh yeah, I decided to do this. Do you want to discuss this?
Do you want to hear more stories?
Yeah, that's always.
In conclusion, I think information should be more accessible because I don't know why everyone tries to hide it. To me, that's just very toxic. They would just like better like prepare people if they're like newly coming into your lab, for example. Like for learning a couple years ago, I was learning how to do like RBS simulations. It was basically kind of like a RBS is really very practice. So I was basically just like simulating data and stuff. I found it very inaccessible. There's nothing online. Like it's very like makeshift. So like I felt like the training was very like there was like scribbled notes on like pieces of paper that I was given, and I was kind of like, okay, we'll go through it once and then go off to your own pace. So what I did is I like made this like document that like went through each thing and like it explained it in the last 2 years and like made my professor and stuff. So like there's things like that that we can really like marriage to like make it because personally like I have auditory processing issues, so like sometimes I can't hear people talk to me. So like having things written down, for example, in like a clear way, like it's very helpful. So getting accessible information is
Almost 2 years. So 1 year.
Look for me, like you in the case,
No, not yet. It was like 20
value. Like, you expect them to know.
No, it's not super.
I always
Yeah.
It's decent to start. So
Like you're there to learn. And like even in like the undergrad labs sometimes, like you go there and they're like, you don't know how to do this lab even though you're meant to learn there and make trial and error and stuff. Like it's ridiculous.
obviously you're gonna say
Obviously, like, go work on it first and then.
And then yeah.
But like, a lot of them just felt like scared to ask questions. Like, I had students like who were really bad, but I didn't know. It's like, you're literally here to learn. Like, I'm not gonna penalize you if you don't know something unless it's like something that's very obvious. Like, you already said.
What's an electron? I don't know. Maybe you should know that if you're in a
Like, there's
chemistry
like
lab.
some like waste disposal stuff. Obviously, that's just like what we told them. It's just like it's like annoying, but it's just like you are there to learn. It's not
Which is still like frustrating.
But it's like like 18.
But they shouldn't be scared to ask.
Exactly. Like I've been in that situation before. Like working in class, like I'm scared to ask the question because like my TAs are just so helpful. It's like I you guys know this. It's like well, now I'm gonna do something dangerous because I'm scared to ask.
Exactly. Safety concern.
Yeah.
like very modern. It has to go somewhere. It's saying otherwise it's yeah. Make sure that
Whenever I started TAing, I always told them the rule of like, I'd rather you ask me 800 questions than do something dangerous.
There are no stupid questions. I love when people say Oh yeah,
Now I feel comfortable.
So we kind of make it not
yeah.
because the slope is what carries
Yeah, no, in my experience, the smartest people have always been the ones that are like, I don't know
and
that.
if it's like
It's like that they always like willingly admit that they don't know something. It's just like I like like that's very nice of you to be like, yeah, I don't know that.
That's how you learn.
Let's learn it together.
Because
Yeah.
if you like think you know everything, which no one does, then you're literally limiting information you can have.
Exactly.
You admit that you don't know things.
Exactly. Yeah, and I've never had that phase like in high school being like, well, I know everything. Like I'm never gonna admit that I'm wrong. And then it's just like, why was I like that?
Right? You're just limiting. I have the same thing.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's like I always yeah. I'm sure you want
but there's a new thing that happened like 4 years ago. There's a thing called so that means that when you have enough experience, you are able to like kind of be
Bless you. Thank you.
I don't know, make you like
Okay, I think maybe one more minute, and then we'll pull people back. Bless you.
So when he first was started, most of them are probably like project oriented or something like, you know, or like close maybe like
Sort of thing.
Yes.
so like you can't just
All right, folks. I'm gonna bring you back. There's a lot of good discussion going on. So I think we'll maybe go around each of the groups and ask you for your insight. So does anyone want to volunteer? Give us an example of a toxic environment or an environment where they just didn't fit. Because if you don't say put your hand up, I'm going to start pointing at people. How about you, sir? Would you like to share any insights that you have on this question?
I think
Guys.
so I'm not gonna put the one inside generally of my own personality.
Pardon?
Is it my own personality side or just general?
Yeah.
Could be personal
Could
or
be personal, general.
So more like what I was directing to moving from Africa
Okay.
down to North America. It was a bit of cultural shock
Yeah.
in terms of our learning patterns back in Africa and this part of the world. And some of the teaching processes, which we went through, like when I came, the first talk I had was on local book exam. So that was local book exam in Africa.
Okay.
So when you get into the hall, you can't be really
You're like, yes.
So
Yeah.
I got up felt comfortable doing it. I was not comfortable putting myself in an exam hall.
Mm-hmm.
That was my first one.
Why did you feel uncomfortable? Was it sort of in direct sort of violation of one of your values, for example?
No,
Or?
to me, it felt cheating.
So integrity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it wasn't something I was comfortable doing.
Okay.
After a couple of years. Then secondly, the first group I was in then wasn't that friendly. Like I said, coming from Africa, some of the equipment that I met here, I've never seen them before.
Yeah.
So it was more like, okay, I want to do
So there was sort of like the supportive kind of piece around in the culture that you were hoping for wasn't there almost.
So people I met wasn't willing to support me because they felt should have done. So when you tell them, okay, I don't know how this goes. So instead of helping you, they go to the pro. Tell the pro, this guy doesn't know how to do it. Think confident. So why did you hire them?
Yeah, it's more like a competition almost.
So it wasn't something that didn't sit well with me, and that's kind of why I had to leave.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the word I would maybe use as well is collaboration. You want that collaborative, supportive culture, and you just didn't feel like you had it, right? So I mean that again is a good insight. You know what you were looking for. You maybe just you know now to ask the right questions, right? Anyone else got examples from this group here?
Well,
Similar.
so in the same situation,
Similar.
like I coming here, for me it was like a cultural shock. But I was already used to an open book exam, different from him because I did part of my undergraduate in the University of South Africa. So when I went to write an exam, I saw the open book too. It wasn't like a shock for me. And for me, again, coming from the working environment, it's completely different from university. Like, we always do things as a group, and then coming here and you're expected to do things on your own. Like, how am I supposed to? How am I supposed to cope? How am I supposed to do this? And they're like, you should know this. You should do this. And I'm like, so it's still a problem for me, and I'm still trying to adjust. But then when you're in a place where you're trying to do things and the people around you are not helping, like discouraging you, it's a challenge which I'm currently dealing with. I always say, I always wish I'm in a group where we had like other people maybe with more experience, probably a group where I have PhD students and I have people that have more experience, and being in a place where you're like on your own, you're trying to learn everything on your own, and then when you make mistakes, the mistake is very obvious. Like you can't even hide. You know, where you're in a place where you cannot hide from from your mistakes. So for me, that's like,
and that's quite different to the work environment where you're working as part of a team.
So I kind of feel different. Like working in an office environment, for me, I always feel like, what am I doing here? I think I should just go back to working rather than being in the school environment.
Yeah, it's a difficult adjustment.
So I had some discussions with my senior team. I have a very big group, right? And the senior team, they do not always have the same values as me. So we have constantly discussions about values. And one time it was about this, right? So I was complaining to one of my, I don't mention any name, one of my senior team member, he was saying the student should know this, right? And I said, yes, but we are still helping. In my team, we are still helping. And then he said, yeah, but it's very important to make mistakes. And I said, yeah, but they do so many mistakes anyway. It's okay.
I think there's a limit to sort of losing confidence,
right,
and not feeling supported,
exactly.
and then that's a downward spiral, and balancing that out. Yeah.
No, and it's as I said here as well. I think especially when it's like TAs that tell you should know this, it usually means they either don't know it, or they want to push you down or don't want to deal with you.
Yeah.
Because there are no stupid questions. Yeah.
And so finding, I mean, we've had discussions around this as well in ICE Dragon, and we go back to our value of growth, right? And within growth, we've defined one of the behaviors as you will coach and mentor. You will enjoy teaching. You will pass on lessons learned. We will have an environment where mistakes are discussed and we solve it together as a team, right? So, there are cultures that exist that are different, right? Okay. So, and I think this might idea of marrying your values, defining your values really well, and then either looking for a culture that fits your values or creating that culture yourself if you're an entrepreneur is really important, literally for your health. So I thought maybe there were some questions that I could give you that would help you to assess a culture that you're moving into. I think it's a really good idea to continue with the reflection that you've just done. What have I experienced before in terms of culture? Where did I feel like I belonged? Why did I belong there? Why did I not belong there? What was going on? How should I behave? What should I be looking for in other people's behavior? And the first question there is around what are the organizational values? So be very careful with this one, because often values are those things that people throw up on the wall. These are our values. Yes, this is what we value. We value innovation, but if you come up with a new idea, you're still going to have to be 95% billable, and we expect you to do it in your spare time. That's not a match in what they're saying and what's happening, right? So just be careful of that one. Do the values of the organization align with yours? Do the behaviors in the organization, are they behaviors that you want to emulate? Do the leaders walk the talk? Because if they don't, that's a massive red flag. The diversity, equity, inclusion one is actually really important for me personally. I find that some organizations are doing a really good job of this now, and other organizations are waving it around going, we do diversity and inclusion, and they actually don't. So it's important to understand what that looks like in the organization, or how you want that to be reflected in your own organization if it's something that you're starting up, right? With that one, I think with my company being a female-led organization in an extremely male-dominated industry such as mining, I think it was just sort of inherent from the start, and as I think you saw from our kind of lineup, we're sort of in terms of gender diversity, we're about 50-50, which is something that we've deliberately held on to. And then, of course, diversity in other ways is also something that we're really sort of striving for as well. Do you see people around you in that organization that you want to be like? Do you see those mentors? Do you see those role models for yourself? The mentally healthy workplace is a really important one, and I think, thankfully, since COVID, we're all a little bit more aware of what that actually means now, and everyone's talking about it more, which I think is great. But what does mentally healthy look like for you, right? So, I think in Ontario, we have, everybody gets 10 days off of vacation every year. 10 days! How are you supposed to survive with that? So we actually close the office over Christmas, like that Christmas break, and those don't count towards your vacation days. And then we have 5 extra paid days off as well. And we're sort of thinking about also closing the office for a week in July. I just think it's inhumane. 10 days is not long enough. So I have a completely different sort of outlook on what healthy work, mental health looks like. So how are people experiencing it? Can you try and gauge that? I think someone, she's left. Our lady at the back there was saying how she's going out and talking to people in the organizations that she's interested in. That can be a very useful way of getting this sort of information. Do people feel proud of what they're doing, and do they feel proud of their organization? That's another good question. But really, the culture comes down to values, and it's that same question. How have they defined their values? What do those values mean to them, and how am I seeing that in the behavior of the organization, which dictates the culture? Does all of that align with me? Lots of big questions there, but it's really just to sort of say that there are some pretty obvious red flags when you're looking to move into an organization, or if you're starting up on your own, that you really want to try and avoid, because it's your health that's at risk, right? So, just to come back to our top 3 takeaways then, hopefully I've given you a little bit of an insight into this idea that yes, your technical skills vitally important for whatever you're going to do with your career, but you're already doing that well done. But there's this other aspect of your learning and growth that you cannot lose I did in my PhD many moons ago, they've actually turned that into a whole institute for leadership and engineering at the University of Toronto, with professors looking into how you combine these two things, right? And many, many courses, and you can actually get a certificate in leadership and engineering. So there is, I think, this burgeoning idea that we need to be teaching engineers more than just technical skills. And if you don't have those opportunities, look for them because they are there. Leadership starts with values. I mean, I've said that 5 billion times, so hopefully that's gone through. And I think it's really important. I'm hoping you'll take this exercise away and continue with it. What I usually do with my values exercise every year is I sit down and then write a mission statement, a personal mission statement, where you're sort of saying, okay, for the next year, these are the changes I want to make, these are the things I want to achieve, this is how I want to live my life, what does that actually look like in terms of actions? So that can be a useful next step exercise for those of you who are interested. And then the last one, values create culture. So within any organization, whether you decide to set up on your own or you're entering an organization, it's really important to get a good understanding of where you're putting yourself physically, right? And how healthy is that going to be for you? And how does that align to your values? And are you really sort of seeing the behavior in that organization that reflects their stated values? So those were kind of my main top takeaways. And then I thought we would use the last 5 minutes in case anyone has